Hello and welcome to another TLDR explained video, this time on the EndSARS protests in Nigeria. We're sorry we're a bit late to the party on this one. We've been meaning to do a video on it for a while, but we've been a bit tied down with the whole US election thing. If you haven't seen any of our 2020 election coverage, and if you're confused what's going on in the US at the moment, then your best shot is to check out the TLDR US channel. Over there we cover all kinds of American news, which at the moment basically just means the election. You can find a link to TLDR US in the description, so head over there and check it out. Let's get into the protests in Nigeria. The protests at the moment are about SARS, a special unit within the Nigerian police force. Before we get into SARS specifically, a bit of context about the Nigerian police generally. A 2016 World International Security and Police Index report ranked Nigeria's police as, quite literally, the worst in the world, and Nigerians consider their police force to be the most corrupt of all of their institutions. More corrupt than even their politicians, who, coincidentally, have lost an astounding $400 billion in oil revenue to corruption since their independence in 1960. Nigeria's police force is also remarkably large, with about 400,000 members, so about 1 per 500 people, about double the per capita rate of other similar African countries, such as Kenya, Ghana and Tanzania. Anyway, SARS, or the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, is, or rather was, a unit in the Nigerian police force. It was set up in 1992, when Nigeria went under a military junta to deal with violent crime. It was essentially an undercover unit, with plainclothes officers and plain vehicles that weren't associated with the police or any security agency. Originally it was quite successful, but it became corrupt pretty quickly. Today, SARS is well known among Nigerians for extortion and blackmail. When the protests first kicked off, Twitter was flooded with stories of Nigerians, mainly young men, being extorted for money and threatened with violence or detainment. And it's not just Twitter anecdotes either. An Amnesty International report from 2016 accused SARS of human rights abuses, such as shooting detainees in the legs, mock executions, hangings, and physical assault. In 2020, Amnesty International published a second report, which documented 82 specific cases of abuse and extrajudicial killings by SARS between January 2017 and May 2020. So you get the idea. The police force in Nigeria are corrupt, and SARS are really the worst of the lot. Now, SARS have been unpopular for decades, but nothing has really changed. The government has constantly been promising reforms, but there's been no major shifts. To demonstrate, let's go through a quick timeline, and it really is quick, honest. In 2006, a presidential committee was set up to reform the police. In 2009, the Attorney General established the National Committee on Torture to investigate police killings and torture. In 2010, Goodluck Jonathan, the then president, earmarked $200 million for police reforms. In 2015, the then Inspector General of Police announced that he would split SARS into 2 units, an operational unit and an investigations unit, in order to curtail the human rights violations. In 2017, the Nigerian government passed the Anti-Torture Act, which has largely gone unenforced. In 2018, after the first wave of EndSARS protests in December 2017, SARS was renamed FSARS. Later in 2018, the government set up a Judicial Commission of Inquiry to investigate the activities of SARS and make recommendations for reform, with the report yet to be made public, almost 2 years after the panel submitted its findings to the government. In 2019, SARS was decentralised to make each federal unit accountable to regional headquarters instead of one single headquarters. But none of these reforms seem to have changed much, as the Amnesty report really demonstrates. As we just mentioned though, there have been anti-SARS protests before, starting in late 2017, even using the same hashtag as the current ones, EndSARS, but they are a lot smaller then than the current protests. So how come these protests have gained so much more momentum? Well, these protests were nominally triggered by the killing of a young man by SARS officers on October 3rd, allegedly after they tried to steal his Lexus SUV, which was filmed and put on Twitter. The video went viral, and the hashtag EndSARS started trending on Twitter. Since then, the hashtag EndSARS has appeared in 28 million tweets, and the protests spread throughout Nigeria. The size and success of these protests probably has something to do with the wider socio-economic situation in Nigeria. With the 5th most recorded COVID cases in Africa, Nigeria was forced into a phased lockdown from March until the end of September, which is, not coincidentally, just before the protests started. Lockdown, combined with a slump in international oil prices, caused Nigeria's economy to shrink by 6%. Given that 40% of Nigeria's population were already living in poverty, and Nigerians just suffered through a 2-year recession, any further economic crisis was bound to cause some unrest. Also, Nigeria has a massive unemployment problem. While it was exacerbated by COVID, Nigeria's unemployment rate has been rising steadily since 2010 and stands at 27%, which translates to about 22 million Nigerians being out of work. Among young adults, the largest bloc in the labour force, the unemployment rate currently stands even higher at 30.7%. So you get the picture. Lots of young Nigerians, poor and unemployed, who've just been forced to lock down for 6 months. We're not trying to invalidate the protests or the cause in any way. We're just trying to explain why these protests have picked up so much more momentum than previous ones. Anyway, the protests picked up steam, and celebrities got on board, including Jack Dorsey, Twitter's founder, and de facto Prime Minister Marcus Rashford. On October 11th, in response to these protests, the government announced the dissolution of SARS, with all officers reassigned to new units, and the governor of Lagos State promising a 200 million naira fund for victims of police brutality. This was promising, but 2 days later, on Tuesday the 13th, they announced a new force called the Special Weapons and Tactics Unit, or SWAT, which would in effect replace SARS. Protesters were worried that SWAT was just SARS under a different name, and on October 20th, the government ordered a curfew to try and stop the protests. Footage then emerged on Twitter of Nigerian army soldiers firing on protesters at LEKKI toll bridge in Lagos at 7 p.m, despite the fact that the curfew only came into force at 9 p.m. The government originally denied military involvement. Yep, that was a real tweet from the official Nigerian army account. But they were later forced into admitting the claims were real. Official figures say there were only 2 fatalities, but reports suggest there might have been as many as 15, and the event soon became known as the LEKKI Gate Massacre. Now, if we're being honest, it's hard to track exactly what happened in Nigeria since, because the curfew has been imposed, so not much information actually gets out. It seems as if the protests have calmed down for a while, but they seem to have also restarted again in the beginning of November. The protests have actually sort of splintered into 2 separate groups, one in opposition to SWAT and SARS, characterised by the EndSARS hashtag, and the other in opposition to the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation Bill 2019, characterised by the Say No to Social Media Bill hashtag. Basically, this bill would make statements on social media deemed to be likely to be prejudicial to national security punishable with a maximum sentence of 3 years in jail. The bill was put to the Nigerian Senate in November 2019, but after criticism from citizens and human rights groups, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, it was pulled. After COVID put everything on hold for a while, the Nigerian Senate is now trying to get the bill through once again. One final thing, there have been some alarming reports of extrajudicial massacres by the Nigerian army in the southern region of Oyigbo in retaliation for the protests. The army and the governor claim that the victims are members of a separatist group called the Indigenous People of Biafra, but the apparent scale of the massacre does make this seem unlikely. Again, it's hard to get reliable information on this topic, but it's something that we should all be keeping an eye on. If you want to be updated when we report on stories like this in the future, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of the videos, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.